Welcome to Fighting on Film, the podcast about classic and obscure war movies. From the Normandy landings to the days of chivalry and swords. If it's been captured on film, we're going to cover it. I'm Matthew Moss of Historical Firearms and the Armourer's Bench.
I'm Robbie of RA Military History. Welcome back, everybody, to Fighting on Film. This week we have a guest with us. We have Richard Fisher from the Vickers Machine Gun Collection and Research Association. Find him on YouTube. Brilliant channel. Welcome, Richard.
Hi, guys.
So, Matt, what film are we doing this week?
This week we are looking at The Way Ahead, a 1944 classic with David Niven, which follows a platoon of new recruits through their call-up, through their training, to their first real deployment in North Africa.
An adaptation from a film from 1943 called The New Lot, which was produced by the British Army. Is it Kinematography Unit or Cinematography Unit? Am I just showing that I haven't got an English?
You're just showing that the army can't spell cinematography.
Yeah, but I always thought it was kinematography. Like I thought they was like European.
Well, it's Kino, isn't it, with the K?
Yeah.
I don't know, but there we go.
The New Lot. It's on IWM anyway, so people can go and check out the spelling for themselves. And let us all know, because that's 3 people baffled by it anyway.
Ministry of Information film is basically designed to show people what the army's like, get across some vital info. And I think it was made just after they changed the conscription age limits and occupation guides. Yep. So they increased the age limit from something like 30 up to 50, and then some of the other occupations that hadn't been called on were called on. Married men as well. So it was like a broadening out of who in society could be called up. So it was important that they explained.
It's definitely a rich stew, isn't it? It's a rich stew of people that join up. That are conscripted.
That makes sense then. As to who the guys are and to the fact they're calling up the boilerman from the House of Commons and stuff like that. It's
a key word.
It's a random selection. Isn't it?
Yeah.
But yeah, so I mean, I watched The New Lot as well as The Way Ahead because I'm putting in the work for the pod. So I don't know whether you did.
Yeah, I did. Yeah.
Okay, cool.
I'm not the weak link here, guys. Come on.
I started to. I had best intentions.
You're the guest, Rich, so we'll let you off. But basically, The New Lot, it has almost the same plot, but it's made on a much smaller budget. It's got much of the cast and production crew behind it. So it has Carol Reed, the director. Peter Ustinov's involved.
Really famous people, though.
Big names.
Yeah,
big names. You got Bernard Miles, Raymond Huntley as the key characters, and of course John Laurie, who's also in The Way Ahead.
Private Fraser, for anyone who doesn't know the name.
Exactly, Private Fraser from Dad's Army.
Yeah.
So it follows this group of it's more of a section than a platoon. It's a platoon in The Way Ahead, but in A New Lot because it's lower budget. It's just a couple of guys, a section. It basically follows them from getting their call-up papers all the way through to. You don't really see any action in the film because it's basically just John Laurie on the back of a truck.
Yeah, in The New Lot, it's just implied, isn't it?
Yeah,
they're either on the retreat. I assume they're either on a retreat or they were on an advance. At the end of that
they're on the back of a Bedford or something.
Yeah, exactly. They're in a QL having a riot. Because who wouldn't in a fucking Bedford? It was distributed by General Film Distribution, who later became J. Arthur Rank Company. So there's a nice little bit of film trivia there. And Niven was an executive producer.
On The Way Ahead, yeah.
How long before The Way Ahead was New Lot?
About a year.
Okay, so Niven was still actually, in the army at that point.
Yeah.
Then when The New Lot was done, or not long, or transitioning across into film roles. Interesting to see what experience they brought from that.
Well, apparently, I read somewhere that Churchill possibly approached them to remake it for a commercial sense to sort of boost the feeling about conscription. I don't know how true that is.
Yeah, I read that he was a major at that point.
There seems to be a fair few rumours about production. I don't know how sort of many are true or not. the one that I picked up is the fact that Ustinov had refused to be commissioned, but was clearly writing good stuff at the time.
Yeah.
And the way they got him and Niven together was basically, he became Niven's Batman. And they were serving alongside each other so that they could have the conversations that officers and men couldn't otherwise have. Which, if it is, it shows a real sort of open-minded sort of approach to the structures of the time and making sure that they fitted what actually sort of the greater good, what they wanted out of them as well. So it's an interesting dynamic that they'd have.
Yeah, it really is. I can imagine that. Sounds like a film in itself. Ustinov and Niven.
Yeah, I think that whole unit would be really interesting.
Yeah,
I don't think anyone's really done any real significant research into it. I know of.
The unit that filmed the new lot eventually ended up going out to Burma in the Far East, and they recorded like video letters to bring home and show people.
Oh, it's the same guys.
Yeah, it's the same unit. Not necessarily the same people, but the same unit.
Yeah, they were really famous a couple of years ago, weren't they? Because they sort of started to broadcast them and release them. Loads of northern units, 2nd Battalion Manchesters were featured quite a bit in it, I think, who were Machine Gun Battalion to 2nd Div, so that's why they were out there. So yeah, I think it was sort of Lancashire Fusiliers and some of those. That's really interesting, actually, to see that they went across to do that. Yeah.
Should we get into the plot, gents?
Yeah.
Try to.
Yes. So it kind of, as Matt alluded to, it follows the exploits of a bunch of new conscripts under David Niven as Lieutenant Jim Perry, with the assistance of the first Doctor Who himself, William Hartnell, and he plays Sergeant Ned Fletcher, probably the most absolute metal sergeant I've ever seen in any film. And it follows the new conscripts under their leadership until they see action. And that's pretty much the plot.
I really like William Hartnell in it. I think he's, his character has a bit of nuance to it, which is unusual. He doesn't like just march around shouting, "I've never seen anything like it in all my life," as they often do in those sort of like early Ministry of Information and early films about the army.
He just looks like a sergeant, doesn't he? When he sort of turns up into that first scene into the railway bar, in full sort of field service marching order,
gas cape and all, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. He's fully kitted up, looks like collar all the way up. He certainly he gives that impression to the rest of the guys there that clearly haven't met him yet. Of okay, this is what we're in for. This is the army, and as everybody should see it. And he's in a public place. He's portraying not only a sergeant as an actor, but also as perhaps a sergeant that's going to an infantry training centre or a primary training centre should look while he's travelling as well. So I think it's a great character, and he really does bring some great character to it.
He acts like he's like a visual representation of what they think the army is at that point, because none of them have been in. So they're all trying to work out, what's it like? I read it in Picture Post that you do this and that and the other.
Yeah. And
then they actually see a proper soldier. He looks like he's just walked out Soldier of Fortune at Military Odyssey and just bought all the BEF gear. But he just.
But it fits properly.
Yeah, but it's all been tailored like really nice. And then obviously Niven. I mean, come on, who doesn't like David Niven?
There's some guys that are instantly recognizable from films before and after. I mean, most of that cast room were in One of Our Aircraft Is Missing. If you know One of Our Aircraft Is Missing, you think, what are these guys aren't in the army, they're in the RAF. You sort of start to think where they were. And it's one of those things that you see British war films, and again you start to think about where people have come from and what they're bringing to things. These people were being trained as servicemen, either directly or indirectly, through their presence in movies portraying military people. And it's not like now where perhaps they're doing a movie every 5 years and they need to reboot camp for it so that they're back in shape. They're just in shape. They're in the mindset of, I'm a serviceman. Doesn't matter what uniform I'm wearing, I'm going to act as a serviceman, and I know what I'm doing. They're just reacting to it in a really brilliant way, to the point that when they're portraying civilians, you sort of go, okay, that's almost the proper acting for them. They're having to rein it back in a bit. So some of those people are absolutely brilliant that we just see. There's some great names there too.
Yeah, like John Laurie, Private Fraser at Dad's Army. He's in the new lot as well. He's one of the only few actors that come across.
He is.
But his character, I think, changes a little bit in the new lot. In The Way Ahead a little bit, because he's in the new lot. He's plays a sort of, he's like the guy that you go to lend an ear to. But in the new lot, he's a bit more feeble, a little bit more timid in a way. He doesn't sort of come into the fore until later on in the movie. It's just interesting how little bits are kept. Like the lad, I forget the actor's name, who plays the more middle class man with his Batman. I forget the character's name.
Raymond Huntley as Private Davenport. Yeah.
Davenport, that's it.
And then you have Parsons, who's played by Hugh Burden.
Yeah, so his character's completely just brought over.
There's just a name change, but he's not quite as posh. He's not in a ministry job. He's working in a department store, so it's a little bit more accessible, I think. And he's not writing letters to the Ministry of Labour to like get him out of the training.
The audacity of the man! I thought that was well cheeky. I was like, "What are you doing?" It's like just serving the army, mate. Come on.
It goes to show that sort of thought about, how some people wanted to, how some people didn't. Some people saw it as an adventure. Some people thought their job was more important because they were, working in the Army Navy stores or something like that, and selling stuff, in retail. They thought, that they were, truly sort of, strict occupations. It's really interesting. My granddad was a farmer and couldn't join up until his younger brother was 18. So somebody took over the farm. So he didn't join up. He didn't, join until 1943. So it's really interesting, to sort of see some of this stuff coming out. He would have been one of these later groups as they went forward. He was in the, LDV from May 1940. Yet, didn't join the army until later. So it's interesting to see just these different reactions. It gives people an opportunity to understand. Not everybody signed up, in September 1939 and went through everything. Not everybody was forced. Not everybody was unhappy when they were forced, when they were conscripted. Not everybody was happy when they volunteered. It just gives you a really mix of emotions to play with.
I think it just shows that even the characters there, they do show the sort of different attitudes to it. You've got the lad who's just bought the Rolls Royce car, or is it a Bentley or Rolls Royce? I can't remember. But he's like, now he's worrying about selling it. You've got Davenport who's like, well, I shouldn't be here because I'm in a department store. I'm selling officers' gear. It's all that sort of. It does. They all have their own like personal axe to grind. I like that, and then it's quickly forgotten about like 30 minutes in. I quite like it. The only I wouldn't say weak link for me, but the lad who has that car, I just wish that he was played by Dickie Attenborough. Because I think it just reminds me a lot of him. I don't know why. I just thought it should be Dickie Attenborough. Really, I think he'd sell it a bit more. I don't know, but that's just me.
Must have been busy.
Well, he's not there to choose from, is he? He's busy doing something else.
Yeah, he was working for the Royal Air Force Film Unit at the time.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I suppose. One of the
it's interesting.
The things about the cast change from A New Lot to The Way Ahead. I think. The new lot has Bernard Miles as Ted, who's quite a likable character. But he's been transferred over to The Way Ahead.
Is that the painter or the bricklayer?
Yeah, he's the bricklayer. Yeah,
I like him.
Yeah, he's kind of a stereotype, but he says at one point, "I don't want to win the war. I want to do bricklaying."
Yeah,
it's very very straight ahead sort of like mindset he has, and he's done bricklaying since he was 14. He wants to do bricklaying in the army, and then his company commander basically says, "Well, we've got more than enough bricklayers in the army. Perhaps you'd be better on a brain."
That's an interesting piece to pick up on in terms of if you think about the vast array of characters that come together, they wouldn't all end up in the infantry. No. Your man that works in the department store is going to end up in service corps somewhere. The boilerman from the House of Commons is going to end up, Royal Engineers or another unit that best suits his experience. And I suppose that is a sort of weak thing in the plot, really, a little bit, that they do all end up in this infantry unit, whereas actually it may not be what they're best suited to. And it makes us, again, it reinforces the point that infantry is everything, and actually we know full well from the numbers and the studies that infantry is just a fraction of everything on so many occasions. Yes, they're the pointy end, but they are literally the point. They're not the rest of the spear.
Interesting you should say that, because I think the new lot handles that a lot better in that it shows Raymond Huntley's character Barrington as being a single operator. It shows only two. I think it's John Laurie and perhaps Wallace, Philip Godfrey's character in a new lot as actual infantrymen on the back of a truck, talking about a photograph of the rest of the guys that were in training. So is a lot more realistic in that it shows that they went off and did different things.
Okay.
And they're wonder what they're up to now. It doesn't matter. We're all part of this giant sort of machine that is going to crush fascism.
A couple of other chaps in it for me from cast members that are great. I mentioned Stanley Holloway. He sort of, for me, jumps out as Ealing comedy. He's a brilliant character actor. In this is this moany, curmudgeonly chap that is sort of he's the sort of gauge of the happiness in the platoon, isn't he? When he's happy, when he's happy, the platoon is happy. Everybody's come round to it. Everybody's still got their gripes, but overall, he's sort of arc of happiness.
I like how he makes himself scarce when they're having their tea in that house, and the woman's like, "Oh, they've got this beastly officer," and he's like, he just makes himself sharpish. He's like, "Oh fuck," he just walks like, "I'm gonna get here." I really like that. It's really funny. And then she's like,
but then he owns up, doesn't he? He sort of tells her downstairs, "Oh gosh, that was him."
But he has the funniest lines for me, like when he's trying to fix the boiler for her, and she's like, "Well, I'll just do this," and he's like, "Oh, well, you could do that, like I'll have to go and face Niven now." I like it; it's funny.
He's got a great line on the train where they're talking about what they all do, and he says he's a boiler man at the Houses of Parliament, and he says the only good one that ever got into Parliament was Guy Fawkes.
Guy Fawkes,
I love it.
Yeah, that's amazing.
And he moans about how long.
Still, such a relevant film to this day. I mean,
yeah, come on,
and he ends up going into Titfield Thunderbolt. That's where I know him from.
Yeah,
Titfield
of course.
He's the steamroller.
I've not seen that in years.
Yeah, not exactly fighting on film, but great film all the same. And then the other sort of cast member for me that leaps out is Leo Genn. I don't know if it's Jen or Genn.
Leo Genn.
Captain Edwards, who's then your narrator for Theirs Is the Glory.
Mm.
And a huge character, ends up as sort of half colonel in the Royal Artillery, lieutenant colonel in the Royal Artillery, and assistant prosecutor for the Balsan concentration camp trial.
Wow!
And you think 2 years ago, mate, you were in a film as a training captain, and now you are doing, you are prosecuting, Balsan concentration camp trial, and you think,
amazing.
Wow, okay. For me, that sort of just tells you the, not only the story arc and everything, but the individuals that are behind it are dipping in and out of these things. Niven goes out of this and goes back into serving as an officer. Leo Genn's there, Captain Edwards comes back out of it, serving as an officer, and it's a really interesting sort of film that tells you as much about the actors as it does about the original story as well. I've got a great anecdote about Niven if when you want it.
Please tell us now.
I'm intrigued about how some of these guys bring their experience to this, because clearly, they're older. Some of them are serving at the same time and stuff like that. So I'd have to go through the list of cast properly to see who was serving. But they're serving, playing soldiers, having been civilians, so they're bringing a lot of their own experience to it. There's it's about as original method as you can get without having to think about it. But Niven was not a natural with the army. He joined up in the early 30s, stayed in for a few years. And when I was doing the Small Arms School Corps research, there was there's a picture on the wall in the weapons collection at Warminster, and it's the course photo of Netheravon with Niven in it.
Oh wow!
Because he was there in, where is it? It's 6th of June to 4th of August 1933. And you've got Lieutenant Niven. He's not Rifle Brigade at this point, I don't think. He's on the machine gun course. So when he says towards the end of the film, go and get that Vickers, he really knows what he's on about. It's a little bit long-winded, so forgive me for it. But the caption on the course photo is really telling, perhaps, of his character. it starts, while describing a young officer's career, it's perhaps worth recalling the occasion when the late David Niven, as a young officer, attended a machine gun course on Salisbury Plain. During the course, he and some of his friends on the course were on the rampage one night in the local pubs and arrived back at the officers' mess. Rather the worse for wear. Then, knowing the next day's programme was to include a demonstration of firing along fixed lines, and also knowing that the area to be used made the instructors reliant upon a particular lone bush as a reference point, they decided to play a small trick. The following day, all the student officers were formed in a half circle around the Lewis gun to be used in the demonstration. It's probably a Vickers, not a Lewis, but we'll forgive them a little bit. And after the opening narrative, the quartermaster sergeant instructor in charge relayed a thunderous fire order to the sergeant on the gun, the range of the target being estimated on the distance between the firing point and the lone bush. Within seconds, a hail of rounds were on their way towards the target. Unfortunately, however, contrary to the expectations of the instructors, the rounds fell some 200 metres short, something which had never happened before when the same south spot had been used, which was often. There then followed much head scratching and checking of sights and refiring, but all to no avail. The rounds simply would not land on target. Meanwhile, in the rear of the group of officers, certain young gentlemen, including Niven, were close to bursting as they recalled the previous evening when they dug up the lone bush and replanted it 200 metres farther from the firing point. And he very shortly afterwards left the army. So, he comes out and goes into filmmaking, not to rejoin until the Second World War.
Yeah,
it's a longer anecdote, but it's just one of those things that, when the war comes along, he genuinely does, sign up again and get commissioned again and sort of re-enter. And but when sort of the opportunity to go back into filmmaking for the army, he must have brought all this experience of having done some of this training himself, having worked with some instructors that weren't likable and things like that. So really interesting to understand sort of what he would have brought to it.
It portrays the army in a different way than the army is sometimes portrayed in, like, British armies, portrayed in war films, because it's shown from civilians' point of view. Doesn't matter what job you are, doesn't matter what social class you've come from, you can relate to someone in the movie. And I think that's, for me, why it still is a relevant film when we're studying the Second World War and studying social history from that time.
It's interesting that the film has such a negative view towards the army, especially at the beginning, which is obviously sort of a psychological tool, in that it's kind of like reverse psychology, in that they're portraying the army and the dread that the men have for the army, and yet they eventually come round to understanding why they've been called up, and finding that the army isn't probably as bad as they suspected or thought. Whether that was true or not, mileage may vary on that one, and everyone's experience was different probably. But apparently the film was made in some sort of conjunction with the Army's psychiatry directorate.
Okay.
And they were heavy behind this push to get that sort of element where they show a realistic reluctance from the men to being conscripted, in order to give it weight to the viewer, so they accept the fact that these men probably are, portraying real characters,
Because they immediately hate Sergeant Fletcher, don't they? They're like, he's picking on us because of the cafe. But in unbeknown to them, he actually says to Lieutenant Perry, "Oh no, I think they're going to make really good soldiers. I think some of them might actually be NCOs." And then we see at the end of the film, one of the lads is a corporal. The actual arcing story is a really complete one as well, and I think that comes through from Carol Reed's. Brilliant direction by Carol Reed, and he later went on to make Oliver and won an Academy Awards as well. So you not only got this great cast, you got this great director who makes a really, really solid movie on top of it. And
he's had a dry run.
Yeah.
With New Lot. So he knows the story. He knows what he's trying to get across. Interestingly, one of my favorite scenes in the New Lot is the scene where they're on the train to the ITC. They encounter a Czechoslovakian soldier. He's a sort of narrative tool to get them into the mindset that they are part of something much bigger. So he talks about, I went to France, France collapsed, so I came to England. If England collapses, Europe collapses. And we're all small cogs in this million-strong, force against fascism.
That's missing from The Way Ahead. The Way Ahead is so, although, as you said, it sort of jumps from section to platoon level in The Way Ahead, it's still platoon-centric, even to the point of when the only time you really see lots of other people are on exercise, when there's lots of carriers banging about and things like that, which is awesome. But then right at the end, when everybody joins them in that sort of final march of the battle scene. And other than that, it's so centric on those characters in the platoon. I think it would have probably been quite useful to throw it out there, but also possibly a storyline that then gets lost. I don't know, but it's really interesting to know that was in the new lot actually, and then cut or that idea not used in The Way Ahead.
Yeah, well, The Way Ahead's already just under 2 hours long, so perhaps it was an element they might have used but then cut. There's also another interesting bit in the new lot where they're on the back of a wagon at the train station, about to head to the training camp. Gets a lift, climbs up on the back, hands him his P14, by the way.
I was just about to say that, yeah.
Into the back of a truck. Don't know whether it was a Bedford Robbie, but anyway, gets in the truck.
I can tell.
And he says, they basically ask him, what's it like being in the army? And it turns out he's just been the glass house. So he's just been to military prison for whatever he's done. I can't remember what he'd done. But he's not portraying like the most positive light on the army. But it's very real. He's been in the glass house, but he's been in for 3 years. So he's an old sweat at that point. By 43, he's probably been in since, I don't know, before Dunkirk, just after Dunkirk. Who knows?
Yeah.
But there's a couple of interesting elements that don't pass over into The Way Ahead.
No, and even like Ustinov's character in the new lot, where he's afraid of a Bren gun, like that doesn't get in either. They're all seen as taking to sort of weaponry quite easily. So maybe that's cut out because it's for the public sort of thing, where they don't want people viewing it to go like, oh, that guy's scared of a Bren gun. I'm going to be scared of a Bren gun as well. Like what the hell's that contraption? Sort of thing.
Well, it's different audiences completely, isn't it? Because the new lot is aimed at soldiers. Yeah. It's a film that was shown only to soldiers. So if that's what you're watching when you get to your training center or whatever, and you see someone's afraid of firing a Bren but can overcome it, then that's good. So they can associate with that and understand that you can overcome these things. But if you're showing that in a film for public consumption, they might take it in a different way. They might say, oh, well, the army's basically,
It's propaganda anyway, so you don't want to be like, oh, our soldiers don't actually want to fight with our guns. You actually want to say like, no, these lads are up for it at any time, So that it's a very interesting sort of thing from a socio propaganda sort of level as well. I think a very interesting movie. So the plot just ends up with them in, well, I thought it was Libya, and someone thought it was Egypt. I don't know where they bloody ended up.
Tunisia, I think. Tunisia. My view is Tunisia. Right. So
I think it's Algeria personally.
Oh my god.
Oh. So North Africa.
Yeah, it's French North Africa. We can all agree on that. It's French North Africa.
Agreed. Yeah.
And it's 1943. I think is the other the other thing. Yeah. Okay.
So they're going to be involved in Operation Torch because it's described as a joint American British landing in French-controlled North Africa. But they're obviously we have that great set piece scene in the middle of the film where the troop ship is torpedoed, and then they return back to Gibraltar because they lose all their carriers.
Yeah.
They lose all their carriers, scout cars, all their kit, even lose their rifles.
And they talk about in that they're split up from the rest of the battalion, and are they going to wait? And that's certainly, it's really interesting because that is reminiscent of like 43 Recce going across to Normandy as part of Operation Overlord. Days after, they lose their vehicles and stuff like that. So it's really sort of relatable and it's really quite realistic. And it's a super scene, and there's some super kit that's in there. They're gutted on that they've lost their kit, and they're gutted that they're not with their battalion. And I think that shows some of the sort of the unit cohesion piece as well.
Well, interestingly, my granddad went out to Singapore in 41, and he was with 18th Battalion Reconnaissance Corps.
Mhm.
So he was carrier trained. He was on carriers.
Yeah.
But they didn't have carriers when he got out there.
Amazing.
So he found himself on foot, just basically as standard infantry. So yeah, so I saw the parallels in that. But obviously, Niven and the lads were lucky enough to get some carriers and before they got sent back to North Africa.
It's time for Ali Tally on Fighting on Film.
So I've got a few, and everybody will sort of just expect me to jump to Vickers MGs, and they'd be right.
Are there Vickers in this movie?
There's I hadn't noticed the Brens, the other things you keep talking about. Bizarre. But no, so it's not just Vickers though. So I've got a little list of them because they're great. I think in terms of Ali as an individual, Niven rocking around North Africa, whichever country he's in khaki drill shirt, battle dress trousers, but just wearing his 37 pattern belt with his revolver holster and the ammunition pouch, above it, and binoculars around his neck. Just sort of is one of those light roll officers, light infantry, Duke of Glendon's, dogs. It is there, and it's just one of those things that you just go, look, this guy actually does know what he's doing. He looks like all of those photos of vehicle-borne motorized infantry, lorried infantry at the time. He just stands out as that for me. And so as an individual, he's the Ali guy. The other soldiers are doing the same. Actually, they look like they're used to the kit. They're wearing it properly. I can't think anybody stood out as like, oh no, and you get that in modern films, don't you? You always get somebody that stood out and go, oh no, you've put your braces on backwards, or how have you got that ammo pouch upside down? Just sort of stuff comes out quicker, is it? Things like that. There's none of that. This is all serious stuff.
And as well, it's rare to see British infantry in their sort of summer fighting uniform with their woolly pulleys in their their shirts underneath. So it's nice to see British soldiers in what they should actually be wearing in the desert.
Nobody can complain that these guys have got the wrong build. Nobody can say that these guys aren't what a British soldier of World War II looks like, Second World War. They are. These guys are the shape that battle dress was made to fit. They haven't lowered the waistbands and extended everything to hide their midriff. They're wearing pouches in the right place. It's just perfect from that perspective. So Ali for me is that look. Yeah. In terms of Ali actions, though, I will turn around and say that the point at which Niven does say, "Go and get that Vickers," and Holloway, Stanley Holloway, Private Brewer, goes and picks it up with the tripod and runs across the street with I can't remember who's his number two, but is it John Laurie? Is it?
Yes, it is, I think. Yeah.
Luke, yeah. So, it's his number two, just like carrying the ammunition box. It's like number two's best day.
And how much does gun and tripod weigh, Rich?
Gun and tripod weighs 90 pounds. So
90 pounds.
40 kilo. You can still, I'll plug my video of picking it up and firing it from the hip because, I know how much that weighs without the water in it. Mm-hmm. Clearly didn't have much water in it, though, did it? Because it goes dry. I know... Robbie will probably want to talk about trucks, but seeing the trucks with Bren guns on top and things like that is Ali from a vehicle perspective.
There's some lovely column stuff, There's
brilliant.
On the exercises awesome. and that column coming into the North African village.
Yeah,
you got the outriders on their motorcycles, and then you've got scout cars, and then you've got all the trucks. It's just really,
it's what you expect, isn't it?
But you never see it in films because the budget isn't there.
The other thing that would have been out in the cinemas at this time, I think, is Desert Victory. So, it's that sort of documentary film that is, is an IWM film now, but Desert Victory is documenting that North Africa victory. So either it would have been out now or just after.
Yeah, I think The Way Ahead came out in June 1944.
Some people say it came out on the 6th. Some people say it came out on the 9th. I'm not entirely
Oh
sure.
wow, okay. I got to say, I hadn't realised the closeness of that to the only date people know about in World War II. It's
They mustn't have known that, but it comes out at a really important time. So that's another thing.
Yeah, it's
well-
very true.
well, thank goodness Mark Clark got into Rome before this came out. So Desert Victory came out in 43, actually.
Yeah.
So they'd have been able to see that and
Of course, yeah.
learn from that. And but that's a documentary, and this is then that sort of, I suppose, that dramatization of some of that same action.
Oh, yeah. So Matt, what's your tally this week?
I've got a couple. I think for me it's the 6-pounder action we get when the Germans break through for the first time and they attack the prepared positions that the dogs are in. A 6-pounder engages what looks like 2 or 3 ostensibly German tanks with supporting infantry. The section's laying down small arms fire, but it's the 6-pounder that takes out the Valentine tank. I think it's a Valentine
It's
anyway.
a Valentine.
That is portraying whatever the Germans were using in the area.
Panzer III, probably? Panzer III?
Probably a Panzer III, I would imagine. But yeah, so it's cool to see a 6-pounder go up against a Valentine.
Smashes it to bits.
And then it cuts pretty quickly in that scene to an on-fire, a long-barreled Panzer III.
Yeah.
So it's got the, is it 70, 72, 76? I don't know what the millimeter of gun is, but it's the longer, it's not the short howitzer variant. I'm not a Panzer expert, I'll be honest. But it's definitely a Panzer III. So that's pretty interesting. Then obviously later in the last set piece we've got David Niven and is it Private Parsons who's his number 2? Anyway, so there's another member of the platoon with David Niven on the 6-pounder opening up on a German mortar position behind a wall.
Yeah.
Which is really interesting in that there's all this kit that's just been left in this village. So there's a Vickers just sat pristine, and then there's a 6-pounder with a couple of rounds just there. But it's a really nice sequence. They close up the trail on the gun.
Mm-hmm.
They drag it over to the position they want it at. They lay it out. Niven misses his first shot, relays the gun.
It was a Ranger.
It
was a ranging shot from Niven.
That's true. We'll give him that.
Yeah.
He realised it was solid shot, it was AP, not HE.
The second round, thankfully, knocks out the wall and probably peppers the German mortar crew with some North African debris. And then just as they run off, you can see that they've not locked the traverse of the gun because the gun starts to sort of like swing, which is a nice little extra thing to notice. But yeah, so the 6-pounder stuff was really nice to see, because how often do you see a 6-pounder in action in a war movie? It's just one of those guns that you don't see, and obviously at that point in the war, it's the key.
It's the new bit of kit, isn't it?
It is. It's brand new at that point. Replace the 2-pounder. It's the key heavy anti-tank weapon of the battalion.
Yeah.
And then the other stuff, which is cool, was there's 2 distinct types of Thompson M1928A1 in the very first training sequence. So they're firing over their heads while they're doing an assault course, and you can see one guy has the classic forward Tommy gun foregrip, and then the second time you see a Thompson, it has the more standard fore end where it's just a straight piece of wooden furniture. So that's a nice little thing.
Is that the same guy, Matt?
It looks like him, but it definitely looks like him.
There's certainly some continuity stuff, because there's actually 2 Vickers.
There is. I wasn't going to say that because that's
of course. But there's the one that they do the close up of. Look, there's a Vickers machine gun with nothing around it, and then there's the one that gets picked up and taken into the bath.
And what's the differences between those, Rich?
I can't remember now.
I think one of them's got a straight jacket, one of them's got a rib jacket.
That's it.
Of course I can remember. They're imprinted on my mind. Yes, one's fluted, one isn't. I think one's also got the dial sight bracket and the other hasn't. So that's
Rich
one.
had his magnifying glass out of the screen like, come on.
That's what the zoom function's for, isn't it?
So that leads us to the most important aspect of this week's Ali Tally. What have you picked out, Rob?
It's going to be all Bedfords.
Well, I've got a couple. My first one will be it's a David Niven-ism, where he's trying to get the lads or the platoon to help him out with a show, and they're not forthcoming. By that point in the movie, they're not friends with him yet. They don't see eye to eye, and he's telling one of the other officers about the show, and he goes, "Oh well, we've got Cook Sergeant Trubshaw who's going to do some bird noises for us," and that's a little reference to one of Niven's good friends, Trubshaw, and his name appears in every single film that Niven was in.
No way. I never knew that.
Really?
Yeah, it's one of the things he
Wow.
he says, like, it's one of his mates who he was also another actor, and they were really good friends. So when Niven made it big, he kept mentioning him in films, and there's movies with Trubshaw in. So he's always in a Niven film, which is really cool. I like that. I was watching it and I was like, Trubshaw, he mentioned Trubshaw. Like, massive Niven fan. And then my second, just the amount of Bedfords that are on the show, I couldn't not mention it this week. So I timestamped it. 15 minutes and 51 seconds, the lads turn up in a Bedford OY, which is really nice to see. And then there's QLs in it. There's MWDs with the tarpaulin,
the hood frame.
The hood frame, that's it, yeah. And then they got Brens on them and stuff like that. It's just wall to wall Bedfords really. And then you've got Carriers, Daimler Dingos, Covenanter. Is it Covenanter tanks?
Yeah, Covenanter. Yeah,
Covenanters. Yeah, ones that go banging past at one point, aren't they?
Yeah, that's probably the most use a Covenanter ever got. That actually, but they look great though, don't they? They're a very cool looking tank. I mean, that turret's pretty cool.
Possibly stand-ins for Crusaders, maybe.
I don't know which div got them, but there was a significant armored formation that was completely or more or less equipped with Covenant.
Was it first Canadian armored div or something like that?
Something I can't remember.
They only ended up in the UK anyway, didn't they? So so that scene where
they never left. They were only used for training.
That scene where they bang past him on exercise is still, as far as it's still spot on. The only thing that isn't spot on so far is Valentine's pretending to be German. Which may have been captured earlier on in the conflict.
I was about to say they could have been captured.
We captured Valentine's, yeah.
Wow.
I mein Gott, eine Valentine's. We used it against Niven.
The Bedfords are the true stars of this film. There's nothing to do with David Niven, John Laurie, etc. It's the Bedfords.
I've got one more detail that's possibly Ali. It's whether it is or not is up to you. It's in the eye of the beholder, isn't it? Or this Ali tally.
Ali is in the eye of the beholder.
It's the helmet flashes. It looks like a fourth div patch on its side. As to what diamond rather than square, but and probably a bit coloured in with pen or something.
Yeah.
But it appears everywhere. It is that proper divisional flash to maintain unit cohesion, to show actually we're bigger, we're part of a division, not just a battalion. Blah blah blah. But it's on the helmets and everything.
Yeah, it's nice attention to detail.
It's just building that character at so many different levels.
Interesting enough, talking about the flashes, a listener at Calais from on Twitter. He said in the 80s he found one of the divisional flashes, but when he told the guy what it was, he wouldn't let him buy it. Somewhere they're floating around still. Great little tale there from a listener. The
shoulder titles appear now and again. Duke of Glendon's shoulder titles.
Oh, do they?
The only thing that I couldn't actually find an image of was the cap badge. I can't see what it's made up out of.
You would think they would give a little close-up. They mentioned Talavera as battle honor. Yeah. So there must be like a lion, perhaps.
No, I seem to recall it's like the centre out of a rifle brigade or King's Royal Rifle Corps cap badge, that cross, Maltese cross style. And then there's a larger sort of scroll underneath it from the likes of trying to think now, but East Yorkshire Regiment or something like that. Similar sort of thing to that. And clearly it wouldn't necessarily have been cast at the time, but made up from a couple of other badges, perhaps.
I mean, the reason they did it was because they didn't want to give precedence to any set division or set unit. So it was just meant to be about the army. So that's why they made up a division.
That's why we have the Loamshire Regiment, isn't it? The Loamshire's one of those, in the books, in the manuals is the fictional division and fictional regiment, and then it's a bit like King's Own Fusiliers from Soldier. It's just everybody, isn't it?
So fave scenes, gentlemen, I think that brings us on to.
Again, I think we have to defer to Rich as our guest.
The favourite scene for me is not one of those battle scenes or anything like that. It's in that, and I've mentioned it's in the railway bar. For me, it typifies the chaos of lots of people moving through railway in wartime. We know the importance of the railways. We know sort of the transport networks are so congested and things like that. And people aren't moving by road in the same way. Railways are important. It gives us a history of the railway. It gives us all of the exposition on the men. It gives us a little bit of wartime problems. So many people, Niven trying to get his cigarettes, things like that. And
gasped on that train. And go flick, please.
Yeah, the Beck, the former travel agent or whatever he is, talks about cancelled services and stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All of that. It's just, for me, they're almost they're the linchpins between the military scenes. They tie in everything, and it just always brings us back to normality again, doesn't it? So even if you are at home watching this or at the cinema, nobody's at home streaming this in 1944. They're all down the pub. If they're in the cinema watching this, they can relate to it because they've been through a train station.
Sure.
They know some of these shortages. Even if they've got nobody in the forces, they can relate to it. So I absolutely love those scenes.
Great. I think what you said about the connecting scenes as well, that could be a conscious choice from Carol Reed, using it as the last bastion of like civilian life, possibly, before they go to join the military, as you say, a sort of, like a metaphor for leaving home behind and going to an army training camp, possibly.
But we see it again as touch points, don't we? Through the film a couple of times. So it's sort of that touch point back to normality in a way. Yeah, maybe.
I think even Niven's wife says, "How many times have we been on this platform in the last 3 years?"
So, Matt, your favourite scene?
I've got a couple. I think to choose one that isn't one of the set pieces, I think my favourite scenes are the two Chelsea pensioners, the old soldiers at Chelsea Hospital.
Oh, so funny, aren't they?
Who open and close the film and have some little interjections throughout. It's two old soldiers from the Dogs, the Duke of Glendon's, and they are unhappy with the way the war's being fought because they would do a better job. Because in their day, men were harder and they got stuff done. Who would want to, face a horde of spears when you can face just a Panzer? I would much rather face a Panzer than a horde of spears, sort of deal. And there's a great line where one of them says, we should have just formed square and let them go round us.
Greece, yeah, should just form squares. Yeah.
And at Dunkirk, he says they should have dug trenches, let them come through, and then got them from behind.
Yeah.
It's just brilliant. And one of the old chaps talks about they must have bayonets now, the likes of which we could never imagine, and great long bayonets. So he's thinking that military progress is a longer bayonet.
He asks the lad, doesn't he? Like, what are you in? And he goes, I'm a paratrooper. Paras are like, proper hard lads.
Yeah.
And he goes, oh, an umbrella dangler. And you're like,
yeah.
All right, calm down. You didn't even know what paratroopers are, but you hate them because you don't know what they are.
There's some great stuff in there because you've got all that sort of, that's how, you see old soldiers reflect. It was better in my day. We all reflect, don't we? Yeah. It was better when I was in there. Superb.
And it's got some really handy exposition where they're doing that training sequence, the montage.
Oh, yeah.
Everything that's been shown in the montage is to contrast with what he's saying. So it's, we used to march 25 miles a day, and it shows them, on a route march.
They wouldn't want to damage their fancy new battle suits. He's talking about that battle dress.
Just a narrative of how much easier they have it than they had it in their day. It's just a nice sort of exposition touch.
I had to look one of those guys up because I thought, one of those guys looked made up to be a bit older, but the other guy is clearly old.
Yeah.
And I looked at a guy called Bromley Davenport, born in 1867. Wow. And that was his last film appearance, and he died the following year.
Oh my gosh.
But so 1867. So when he's genuinely reflecting on life, it's just amazing to think.
Yeah. He could have been in the Zulu campaign that he mentioned.
Yeah.
One of them's wearing a Kurdish star or something like that.
Yeah.
It's just amazing that the fact that there's this actor who was born in 1867 in a film that we're now watching and talking about, in 2021. It's just remarkable.
It's almost surreal
It's weird, isn't it?
when you think about it
Yeah,
in those terms.
Because he mugs off his mate,
Yeah.
doesn't he, when he's talking about like one of the actions, and he's like, "Oh, I think you might be a bit too young to remember that," but he's clearly
Yeah.
talking to the older guy, and you're like, "Hang on a minute, what are you talking about?" I love it.
Yeah. So that's one of my favorite elements of the film. One of my favorite scenes from the new lot is the train scene I mentioned earlier with the Czechoslovakian soldier. That's a really interesting piece of sort of cinematic exposition.
Yeah.
And then also in that film, there's a really interesting part at the end. It's sort of the climax of the film. It's the only real action in the new lot is the lads have finished training and they go to the cinema to sort of celebrate. And they watch a war movie.
Yeah.
And Ted, I think it's Bernard Miles, his character says, we should go and see this film. It was good when I saw it in London, obviously before he, went to training. So they go and see this film and it's full of sort of like ludicrous sort of
overacting
and
oh, that's right. I did see that clip. Yeah.
And stupid military sort of like decisions. Like he's stood on a crest. He sort of like struggles to get over some barbed wire.
Yeah.
He's firing his revolver in like the most arcane manner with his wrist at 90 degrees. It's just ridiculous. And they're all sort of like catcalling and shouting out all the stuff he's doing wrong. It's like, you go under it, not over it, and that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
I just thought that was a really interesting thing. You never see that sort of technique of people ridiculing a film within a film, which is really interesting.
Because he gets up at the end and goes, "Oh, it was actually good. I thought it was good, but it's not now."
Exactly. So he's learned that it's like,
that's a made-up film, isn't it?
Yeah, it's
made up.
I think it was shot for the new lot.
Right. Okay.
And it's just for them to go and sort of like have a little bit of a climax without doing a full set piece.
Was it Melodrama VC? Is that the name of the film?
Something like that, yeah. And he gets shot and he falls and he clutches his chest, and then at the end, the film within a film ends with them pinning a VC onto him.
But his chest, yeah. He's done it. Oh my gosh, he's done it.
Yeah, and it's got like a brigadier going, "Oh, his father would be so proud.
His father would be so proud of him now. It's so bad."
It really is. And the pillbox explodes with the force of a nuclear explosion after throwing like one Mills bomb at it.
He's got one of those experimental Mills bombs, doesn't he? Yeah.
Yeah.
Great. No, I love it. Brilliant.
It's one you can have a fighting on film, like episode 272 is.
Yeah, when we finally run out of things, we'll start doing films within films.
Yeah. Just trying to legitimize it. We're seeing a war film. It counts.
That brings us to you, Robbie. What's your favourite scene this week?
So actually, I've got a couple. I like the bit at the start where the old TA instructor is talking to him about the Lewis gun. Quite like that.
This is the old Lewis. This is the 1914 pattern.
We'll get the 17 pattern that's a little bit better. I used it in 18. It was great, sort of thing.
There's no better gun for dealing with enemy aircraft.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah. I think just point it to the sky and give him a burst. And
that's really interesting because at the time you've got to think Lewis guns were the anti-aircraft like machine gun. It wasn't until the Bren, they sort of developed the 100-round drum for the Bren.
So that shows they've done more research as well of pre-war doctrine, I guess. Yeah. I just liked it. It was really good, and
it's a great scene. You got the house band waiting to rehearse behind them, and he's like, "Won't be a minute, just finishing this."
Talk about the Lewis gun here, mate. Yeah,
it's lecture on the Lewis.
Really funny. Just thought it was really great, and it shows the progression later on when they get Brens.
I think it's really interesting. They show Niven's character as going from a territorial through to being a NCO. In an active service territorial unit that's obviously been over to France, and then they show him obviously going to they talk about him going to NCO school, and then he's put on the officer training course. But Hartnell's character, Sergeant Fletcher, is the only regular in the platoon. They mention that specifically.
Yep. And my second favorite scene, when their troop ship gets torpedoed, I felt the tension of the lads. Because I assume some of them they might have never been like abroad before, so I felt for them because I was watching it with my wife for making notes, and I turned and I said to her, I wouldn't want to be on that troop ship. That's the only part I think that would really scare me, is the uncertainty. You know, you could be sunk at any moment, sort of thing.
Yeah, they hear the depth charges going, don't they?
Yeah, and when they get hit, they're all really panicking, trying to get out, and Niven calms them down. But as well, from that scene, it's the scale of that scene that really gets me. I think it's beautifully shot.
Yeah.
You know, you feel that this troop ship is absolutely heaving with men and heaving with equipment, you know, and they really, you know, the urgency of trying to keep that magazine cool is just really well done. And it also shows how far the units come. You know, at the start of the movie, they would have left Hartnell to his fate. Like, catches his leg under a Daimler Dingo that's broken free. Possibly the only film where a dingo is the villain, which I thought was quite funny. But yeah, it just shows the progression of them, and they're up to help. You know, they might have scarpered if it was early on in the film, but now it shows that the men under Niven's command will do anything for him and anything for Fletcher. So it's quite a pivotal scene from a narrative point of view, because it shows how far they've come. And I just think the scale of it is fantastic, and it's got Trevor Howard in an early role.
It's his on-screen debut.
Wow.
That's incredible. And he later goes on to be in The Third Man, also directed by Carol Reed. So there's a nice little connect there.
Oh yeah.
Can I add a little bonus one in? Because we haven't talked about it, and it's, you know, it is Fire in the Vickers, and I know you had a little bit of a chat about it on Twitter. But of course, you know, it gets hot. It you know, it does exactly what it should do when it hasn't got much water in it, and it overheats and jams because everything expands too quick.
Yeah.
And then thankfully Ustinov's on hand to try and you know, cool it down with some local plonk. You know, it's one of those that just explains a little bit more, you know, to the general viewer that, you know, these things stop. You know, it has implications. It means that the 6-pounder can't be used properly because they're providing covering fire for it. They've got to cool down. Stanley Holloway's, you know, they clearly know what they're doing. You know, as individuals.
He knocks it off, doesn't he, as well?
Yeah, he's tapping it, and you talked about that in the baton. Yeah, just to prove I listen. Yeah, you talk about you talk about that in the baton review, the pod there, about how they're knocking it, and that's tapping, and it's something they were trained to do, because, you know, they were trained to do a 2-inch tap. So basically, every time you hit the weapon, that was taps left and right, and that was part of the fire control orders as well. So, you know, depending on the range, obviously, you knock it, so you knock it and it goes, you know, right of arc 100 meters, right or 100 yards. You know it. If you're a machine gunner, you know what your strength of tap is, so you make sure that the front clamp is done up properly, and you know how to use it. So he's holding that cross piece properly. He's got his fingers rested on the top. He's firing it with a thumb piece, and he's tapping the gun. He knows how to use that Vickers. He opens it up, takes the lock out at one point, and you can imagine on a film nowadays, an armourer would be going, "What? No, don't open it. You'll break it, or it'll break you." They know what they're doing, and I think it's just, you know, another one that perhaps typifies that the cast are in a good place, and by this point they are proficient in using their SMLEs. You know, they're proficient in using the Brens. They're proficient in running across, getting a 6-pounder and using that, albeit Niven, you know, the officer, but he takes a man with him, and they're proficient in using the Vickers. They're a fully well-trained infantry battalion that's come together, and it peaks at the end of the film, you know, in that way. It's really, really good.
I also thought that that's a sort of that might be the sort of leaning on of the production of the War Department being like, look, you have to include every bit of cool kit we've got to fight at the moment, because you have to prove that the army is the modern army at this point. Because as well, we were making propaganda pieces to send to America to show them how advanced we were, because the consensus in America was that our army was a bit shit. So this might prop up the idea that actually the British Army is just as mechanized as you lot.
Yeah. Well, going back to the ship sequence, afterwards, Corporal Lloyd says that was some of the best kit we've had. You know, when he's talking about the carriers and the dingoes and various stuff that's on the ship.
I can't believe how much I trash in that scene. It's so upsetting.
I know. It's such an impressive sequence though, and it's studio bound, but
I'd love to know how that was filmed, and I don't know if you guys.
I think you overlay. They must have had a ship coming in, film their set, and then you overlay the two pieces so it gives depth. I think that's how it was done.
Yeah, no, I sort of mean more the tipping. So was that done in a rolling tank or not?
Oh, maybe.
So actually, is that Daimler rolling and the camera, or is it camera on the side and being pushed or pulled? Because certainly I couldn't tell.
No, you can see the strain on their faces though. It looks very realistic. Like they're either pulling or they're pushing.
It looks like somebody, they've got a hefty lad to wait, to pendulum off the dingo at the other end so it doesn't fall against Hartnell's leg. And aren't we all thankful that he did, only let it touch just so much?
He'd have been Dr. Hubble if they
he would, yeah. Superb scene that, like you say, captures more of that kit and shows that we lost it at sea, but we're back in North Africa and we've got it. It's fine. We've got enough industrial might, all that stuff.
One thing I was going to ask you, Rich, was how long will a Vickers run dry before it jams?
I'll be honest, it depends how long it's been firing anyway, but about 1,000 rounds.
Okay.
Yeah, it depends how hot you're running it. I mean, he's running it hot actually, so I would say less than about actually. He's not doing his standard 25 round bursts with 20 seconds between them. He's sort of running bout at a time and stuff. So yeah, actually, again, back to the accuracy, that would probably start to seize up.
That's just something that occurred to me when I was watching it the other day. I thought
I never filled up my jacket with water when I used blank. I assume in that movie they didn't need to.
Well, I wonder if if you start to sort of double think things, why is the Vickers left there?
Yeah.
Has it seized up? Have the guys, done a runner?
Bad crew. They left the gun. That's an awful crew, isn't it?
Yeah. If it's boiled up, it's effectively useless for a while at least.
Maybe they were off getting some water and they came back and they're like, "Where the fuck's our Vickers gone? Who's that?"
They found water in the bar and stayed there.
It's in Peter Ustinov's completely destroyed cafe. Because Peter Ustinov's character in The Way Ahead's obviously different from his character in the New Lot, where he portrays a young soldier. But in The Way Ahead, he's stretching the legs of his French because he doesn't speak in English at all, so it's all of his dialogues in French. But you know what he's getting across as the cafe owner, who's sort of a pacifist, not particularly an Anglophile, but through the love of darts and the friendship of the platoon, he comes to their aid with some bottles of plonk, as you mentioned, Rich, when the gun seizes up. But we don't see him again after that, so I can only assume he was in the building when it collapsed, that it cuts away from.
When they're not in the little cellar bit?
In the cave?
I don't know, I hope so.
Yeah, in the cellar.
I hope so.
It would have been
with the random gendarme.
Oh, yeah.
You see the gendarme pop his head up.
Yeah. It's weird, isn't it? Yeah.
It's interesting.
He'd have been a Vichy, he'd have been a Vichy gendarme, wouldn't he?
May have been. Yeah.
Maybe Niven was just like, ignore that. We'll just ignore that. You know what I mean? Any final thoughts, lads, before we wrap up?
I know we talked about it before we decided to do the episode, and you were perhaps thinking that it lags a little in the middle.
Yeah, I thought so.
It is an almost 2-hour film, but I didn't skip through any of it.
No,
which you can find yourself doing sometimes when you're watching something a couple of times, and I think the film stands up really well because even though that long sort of central section is the training and there's not a great deal going on, it's those little scenes within the platoon and the human nature of them that makes it it's very watchable. And that's sort of a testament to Ustinov and Ambler's sort of writing on the film and Reed's direction as well. It holds your attention throughout.
Yeah.
And then we get that great set piece on the transport ship, which you almost don't expect. You're kind of like thrown into it. You've had this long middle act where it's just been character building. The platoon's been growing as a unit, progression, and then you get that sort of like first test of the platoon, and it's nice to see them all come together, and then they feel like a battle-hardened soldierly unit by the time we get to that sort of final act set piece within
Yeah.
the village and that climactic battle, which obviously that final set piece battle doesn't have anywhere near the budget behind it that the transport ship scene has. And I think that plays into them showing sort of the metal of the unit coming together. That was the focus of the film rather than just having an action sort of like set piece. But of course, at the end, you do get that grim determination where they all fix bayonets before they move off.
And then shows everybody. So it then shows that actually, no, look, we're not the only platoon out here. Everybody else as well, because you get people coming out of every sort of building and everything.
They sort of just emerge, don't they?
And interesting enough, the ending of both the New Lot and The Way Ahead, with the men with bayonets fixed going towards the camera, is parodied at the end of Dad's Army quite famously.
John Laurie being the expert.
John Laurie being, just a nice little tidbit there. But no, I agree with you, Matt. We were talking about it, and I thought it lagged. I thought it dragged on. But actually, having watched it a couple of times for this episode, I don't think it does. I actually think it really holds up for 2021. Watching it again, I think it as a film, it actually has a really good pacing. I didn't get bored. I wasn't. I remember when I was younger, I didn't like the bit where they go and have the tea and then they have their bath at that lady's house. I thought it dragged. But being older, a little bit more
patient.
Yeah, patient. Yeah, being more patient with movies. I think it didn't drag at all, and I actually liked the character study of the men changing. I felt that was really good, and I do. As I said, I really think it holds up now, and because some of those films from back then just don't, unfortunately.
I think the New Lot stands up quite well as well.
It does,
for what it is. I think it's got a very strong cast, and it's more or less the same production team. But that idea is the core idea for both, so they both stand up well.
And equally, if you're a film fan, there's just so many famous people attached to this movie. If you're a Doctor Who fan, you can see William Hartnell in a non-Doctor Who role. Carol Reed's wartime work, and it's just like, it's amazing. It's just such a rich tapestry of filmmaking.
I think for me, just this is one of my go-to films. I work up here in the collection, and think what can I have on the background, and if I've run out of podcast material and up to date with Fighting on Film, then it's one of those that I can stick in the DVD player and just have on, and you sort of pick up stuff every time. It is long, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's tedious. And I think we're now used to 2-hour Marvel epics and things like that. So I think for anybody that just still wants a 90-minute film that gives you a full story and a full sort of background to characters and things like that, those films don't exist. Those films are the snappy wartime films that perhaps just jump into story. This is a whole story in itself. You don't need to have seen the New Lot first. You don't need to understand much about the character of the British Infanteer. It's really interesting to sort of try and capture that, and it takes a little bit longer to do so. So it's far from tedious. I'd say it's a great sort of go-to movie.
When you think about it, there's a lot more going on with the characters than you would imagine, because you've got it's James Donald as Corporal Lloyd, who has quite a brooding, deep sort of I don't know, there's a bit of depth to the way he portrays that character. He's on the cusp of doubting everything that's going on. He's the one that complains to Niven about the sergeant.
He's certainly not my favorite character, and I don't know whether that's his character or the actor or the individual, but he's certainly one of the most useful actually in the film, for getting some points across. And he's the chap that ends up as Lance Corporal in the end as well, isn't he?
Yeah, he is. Yeah. We see two sides of a platoon sergeant in the film. We see the side that he portrays to the men, where he's hard, business-like, soldierly, and isn't afraid of criticizing and getting them to be better soldiers. But then in the mess, which are nice sort of like little scenes, we see him in the sergeant's mess and stuff, where he's talking about, it's a good platoon. I've got a lot of sort of hopes for them. They're gonna turn into, you know, a decent set of soldiers, and he's, you know, almost enthusiastic about them. That's something we don't really get to see too much of, I don't think.
No, and I think, you know, there's a really inspiring piece about leadership. Actually, you know, a platoon commander in training at Sandhurst could, you know, or, you know, subaltern could sit and watch this and think, oh, okay, there's some lessons to be learned from it. Or there's some characterization of an infantry officer, a platoon commander, or whatever, you know, during the Second World War, and it's almost as good as reading as, you know, like 18 Platoon or you know, one of those memoirs, to give some classic, you know, small unit tactics, small unit understanding, relationships, things like that. So, you know, I hadn't thought about you know, its validity, its usefulness, perhaps, but there may well be a space for some of that.
I think so. I think there is. I think I read somewhere that it was used on staff courses for a little while, you know, officer training courses, as a bit of an example, as one of those sort of like films that they can just put on and be like, this is an example of, you know, interesting command styles, etc.
Because some of those elements wouldn't have been acted. Yeah, they clearly are acted and written, but they're being written for by, you know, serving soldiers, and they're being portrayed by serving soldiers and serving officers. Yeah.
Yeah, they know what they would do in that position, that situation.
But thank you very much, Rich, for coming on. I think it's been
no problem.
Great pick, Rich. Thank you.
It was either that or Get Cracking with George Formby. And
okay, so we're going to cover Get Cracking when you come back. Okay. Any Vickers guns in that one?
Yeah.
I don't think I've seen it, so I'm gonna go watch that now.
There we go.
Well, there we go, for a few weeks' time, perhaps. Yeah.
Don't forget, everybody, to give us a like, a subscription, a comment on whatever you're listening to. Keep leaving those written reviews on Apple Pods because we love them, and we'll catch you in the next one. Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Cheerio.